Following program is sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts. Welcome to About Money, a different approach to investing you won't hear anywhere else. Your host, Mike Adams, is a registered investment advisor and works with investment portfolios exceeding over $100,000 in net worth and has a proven track record of managing long-term investments, surpassing the markets in the long term. The information shared on the following program is for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. And now, here's Mike.
Here we are, KLFE 1590, the answer about money. That's what we are. Here we're going to go. So here as we begin the month of March, we have come to the end of February. February ends down for the month. It breaks a string of 10 straight months where the market was up every single one of those months. We have not seen that happen since 1959. That was the last time we had 10 months where the market was up every month for 10 straight months, and then you had a break. 1959, remember what was going on? Probably not. You're probably too young to remember, or you were a kid growing up. I was. Anyway, 1959 was the middle of a secular bull market, a bull market that started in 1941 with the Dow at 100, ended in 1966 at 1,000. You know, it increased tenfold. That was one of the bull markets I've talked about in the past. 1959 was right in the middle of it. So it seems almost, deja vu that we're seeing that happen again here in 2018. So that's one thing. Second thing that happened today, or happened actually on Thursday, the president announced they're going to levy tariffs on steel, 25%, aluminum, 10%. You know, that has tremendous implications on a lot of things, on NAFTA, on trade wars, and so on. It's going to take me a little while to work my way through that. I will be talking about that next week. Almost for sure, I will focus on that for next week. And as I was talking about that, you know, for the last 9 years, I've been talking about Dow 100,000. I've been talking about the super cycle. And in my office, a lot of times, I have CNBC going. I have an awfully large screen these days, 43 inches. It hangs on my wall. And I was looking at CNBC a couple days ago, and usually I don't pay much attention to it. It comes in one ear, and unless there's something that is really of interest, I don't really pay any attention to it. But a couple days ago, it caught my attention. Caught my attention because of what a person was saying. I've been talking about the super cycle. I've been talking about Dow 100,000. I've been talking about that for almost a decade. And here was a guy that's talking about everything coming crashing down. I've been talking about the way that I think this is going to end with a bout of super inflation. But here's somebody that was talking about a crash coming up. And when somebody talks and is saying something that contradicts what I feel, I tune in and I listen to what they say and I listen to the reasons that they're saying it. And I focus on that because I can be wrong. And if I'm wrong, if somebody says something and I realize I'm headed down the wrong direction, I need to change. That's no question. So I really focused in on what this guy was saying, and I don't believe what he said. I'm going to tell you about that later in the program. So you have to listen all the way through the program to understand what he said and why I believe he was wrong. So anyway, I've been doing a series on financial planning, and you can talk about it in theory. You can talk about how it works or doesn't work, but it really comes down to talking about a specific example. And I want to use a specific example. A client of mine who came to me in August of 2000. She was 53 years old. She had fibromyalgia. She'd been diagnosed with Lyme disease. She was taking significant medications. She was having a significant medical expense. But that's not all that was going on. She hadn't lived a life of luxury, but she lived a comfortable life. But with all that, she had been recently divorced. She ended up with a modest home out of the divorce. She ended up with no alimony. She had a need to cover her medical expenses, her house, and her living expenses. She needed $5,000 a month. But all she had when she came to me was $916,438. That was the settlement from the divorce. $916,438. Now, before she got to me, she'd been to a couple other financial planners, and they said essentially the same thing to her. They ran her through the computer information. They took all the information, they ran it, and they said, you're going to run out of money by the time you're 72. And I don't know if both said 72 or if that was one said 72 and one said she was going to run out of money before that. The recommendation was she could do a couple things. One, she could, and they didn't say it specifically, but she should hope to die before she turned 72. She could sell her house and move into a very tiny apartment, and what she could afford with what equity she had in the house was not very much. Otherwise, she could cut back on her medications. Now think about that. You're 53 years old, you've been diagnosed with a couple chronic medical diseases, you've got a significant outflow of money going for medication and for medical expense, you've got a house payment to make, you've got your living expenses, you've got your food, you've got the transportation. And as it turned out, you also tended to be a hoarder through this whole episode. A lot of stress. When you look at the scale of stress, the number one thing on stress is a divorce. Number 4 is an illness. Number 6 is the potential of running out of money. I mean, if you look at what she was going on, she had all those stress factors really teaming up and hanging on her. For a normal person, it would be a huge load. And it was a huge load for her. She came having been to a couple people, and she was pretty depressed when she got to my office. She said, I don't know if you can help or not. But I looked at her situation and I said, we sure can't do something conservative. If you came to me with $5 million, it'd be pretty simple. Would have been simple for the other people as well. You've got $916,438, and you need $60,000 per year. That's huge. That's 6.6%, actually a little more than 6.6%. Most financial people will tell you it's very, very difficult to take 4% out of a portfolio. For her, taking 6.6 was something that was beyond financial planning. But I felt she could do it. She came in August of 2000. Now think about what was going on in 2000. We had the dot-com thing going on, and the market was caving in. With all that, I said, we can't look at income investments. We have to look at a total capital appreciation portfolio, and it has to be somewhat aggressive. Not overly aggressive, but somewhat aggressive. I said I have 4 clients who are truly aggressive. They have the tolerance for risk, and they have the ability that if everything went wrong, they could lose all the money. I said, you have no way to replace anything that you lose. I said, we have to be moderately aggressive to meet $60,000 a year. But I believe I can do that. I've done it for other people in my career. I believe we can do that. She passed away last August. She was 70 years old. But at the time she passed away, she had started with $916,438, and over 17 years, she withdrew $1,282,943. That's an average not of $60,000, but of $75,467 per year. There were special times in which she needed special medical care. She needed to make special withdrawals. So it wasn't $60,000 she withdrew. She was taking an average of $75,000. That means she was taking out a little over 8% per year. And yet, at the time she ended, she had an account that was still worth $640,888. So she started with $916. She took out almost $1.3 million, and she had $640,000. You know, had she gone to a traditional financial planner, she would have been out of money before August of last year, because at the time they did the financial plan, we hadn't gone through the dot-com total. We hadn't gone through the Great Recession. Those would have been dramatically down. You know, and even as we went through the dot-com time, her account dropped off as low as $562,000 from $900. She was worried about that at the time. You know, those were the times that she did call, and I would assure the best I could that the value of the account would rise, and it did. But it was emotionally draining, as you can imagine. She was worried, and she'd been told she'd been run out of money. She was worried that she wouldn't even make it to 72. But I kept talking that we were going to make it through, and in fact, we did. We're coming to a commercial break. I'll finish this after the break and have a few comments about the whole thing. So don't go away. I've got a great guest today who's got a great story to tell, and I'll come back to what I heard on CNBC. So don't go away. So much more to come on KLFE, The Answer About Money.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So we are on 1590, The Answer About Money. So I've been talking about a client. Did a series on what's wrong with financial planning. I want to apply it to a case of a client. She was 53 years old in August of 2000. She was 53 years old. She'd been to financial planners who ran all their financial planning software and said she was going to run out of money by the time she was 72. She actually died this last August. She had started with $916,000. She'd taken almost $1.3 million out of the account and still had $640,000 left over. But we went through some volatile times. The dot-com thing took us down to $562,000. And when it came to March of 2009, the lowest that account ever reached was $448,739. I remember those numbers very well. And it seemed like she had less stress at that time. We'd gone through the dot-com. She'd seen the account go down. She'd seen it rally. We'd gotten up to almost $1 million before. It seemed less stressful, but she sent me a letter from James Dale Davidson, because she even listened to what was going on in the financial markets. He'd written a book called The Great Reckoning, Protecting Yourself in the Coming Depression. He wrote the book in 1993. And he began saying in the 1990s there was going to be a bankruptcy of the worldwide welfare estate. There was going to be a breakup of most institutions. There was going to be a debt implosion, consumer and corporate bankruptcies. And I'm going to talk more about that because it applies to what I heard on CNBC earlier this week. It's fascinating. Fear sells. It sells books. It sells investments. Fear sells. People get scared. And my client had been told she was going to run out of money. She had that fear for years and years. But that's a real life example. Had she come to me a few years later, I don't think that I could have helped her. I can remember one person who came to me. He was in his 60s, maybe into his 70s. It's been a long time. And he needed some real portfolio management. He needed something because he was nearing retirement and had not saved a lot of money. And I told him he was going to need almost a 30% return to achieve what he wanted to. And he asked me, why 30%? And I said, because he said he only needed 12 to 15% per year. And I said, and I gave him my example, which I give very often, an example of, and I use $100,000 just to make it easy to understand. If a person has $100,000 and they need 20% per year, the first year they put the money in, the market goes up 20%, so their account value goes from 100 to 120,000. They take 20,000 out, they've got their same 100,000. The next year the market goes up 20% to 100, their account goes to 120,000. They take the 20,000 out, everything is good. Third year, the market doesn't go up 20%, it goes down 20%, and the 100,000 shrinks to 80,000. When they take their 20,000 out, they're left with 60,000. Now to get back, so that they can get back to 20,000 and having 100,000 left, they have to have that 60,000 double. Now that's an extreme example, but it illustrates why we talk about, and why in the industry they talk about, taking 4% out of a portfolio is very difficult. It's very, very difficult when portfolios are growing at 5 or 6 or 7%. So for me, it's not a straight ratio. If you need 4%, it's not taking out a portfolio of 8 that has to grow 8%. If you need 8%, not 16%, the ratio increases the more you need to take out. So for somebody to take out 12%, mathematically, in order to get around this issue, you have to achieve almost a 30% return. And as I explained that to him, I said, I do really, really well, but I don't do that well. There's no way I can help. You have to deal with working longer or cutting back your expenses. There's just, and when my client came to me with her situation with $916,000, that was a little bit less than borderline, but it was a pretty aggressive move that we had to make. And we made it. I believe we made it because I didn't fall into a trap of believing that the computer with its financial planning software was going to deliver correct results. Anyway, life changes, and those things happen. And financial planning software is based on averages going backwards. It doesn't deal with great recessions, doesn't deal with superinflation, doesn't deal with dot-coms. That's something that has to be dealt with in investment management. Lives change. I think about some of the changes that have gone on during my lifetime. I grew up and I had a friend whose mother had a nervous breakdown. And her doctor's recommendation was to take up smoking to relieve her nerves. Can you imagine that today? There was a time when we believed that eating meat was really good, for the center of the universe was the earth. And remember the changes that have happened. Internet was something you dialed up. It wasn't on a DSL line. And what about chemistry? Remember the periodic table? When I was in high school, and in 1970, there were 106 elements. Today in the periodic table, there's 118. Facts change. Even knowledge changes. Think about how knowledge has increased. Medicine doubles its information and technology every 87 years. Genetics every 32 years. Chemistry every 35 years. And each time is greater and greater. That 80% of all the scientists that ever lived are alive today. And if you go back over time, if you go back to 1600s, 80% of the scientists who lived in 1600 were alive in 1600. That's the information and the knowledge we're gaining. So when you focus on financial planning and when you focus on investments, the world is changing very rapidly. And our way of investing has to keep up with it. That's where we are. Anyway, want to wrap this up, and we've got more information coming very soon. But I want to introduce my guest today. He's got a great story to tell, Mark Stern of The Big Picture. Mark and his wife, Katie, actually did The Big Picture. So we're going to find out about that. Welcome to the program, Mark.
Thank you.
So why don't we start with your background, going all the way back?
All the way back. Well, I told you 1959 is how you started your show, and that's how I started life. And my family opened their first movie theater in 1927, silent movie theaters. And then in the Great Depression, during the time of 1931, my grandfather Henry had a big decision to make. He had to decide if talkies was a fad or not. If you can imagine that conversation in 1930, 31, do we invest in something that many people thought would be a fad? And my grandfather had a partner, and his partner was his brother, and Phi Beta Kappa graduate of college and prestige, and the brother felt that talkies were a fad, and luckily my grandfather talked him out of it, and they invested probably around something like $10,000 back then, which was a huge amount of money. And of course, my grandfather was right, and his theater, called the Cinema Theater, ended up being one of the most successful movie theaters in Chicago, and they were the first art house theater ever built in Chicago, playing foreign films, art house movies.
Well, I can remember when I was chairman of the board of Seattle Theater Group and we had silent movie nights. Mm-hmm. One of the comments, or one of the illustrations that was used, was over that, change of the silent movies to the talkies. And they said, the problem with movies where people talked is you didn't have to act. If you were in a silent movie, you had to convey everything through your actions and your acting. And with talk, you could just talk. It's like radio, maybe. Anyway, go ahead with your story.
Well, my grandfather had a theater called the Cinema on Chicago and Michigan Avenue, and he had that for 40 years. And then several years before that, he lent money to a gentleman who was having a hard time. He owned a concession company, and my father found a theater in Wilmette by Northwestern University in the North Shore in the Chicago area. And my dad didn't have enough money to buy the theater because it was for sale, not for rent. And my grandfather said, well, what about this concession guy? I lent him money. Let's see if he'll lend you some money. And the guy got a call from my father. He says, I know who you are, and you tell me what you need, you got it. And the gentleman lent my dad the money. He then bought the Wilmette Theater, and I worked for my dad, managing his theater and starting in 1976, and I learned the business from him. And then I wanted to buy the theater from my father, and the way to do that, to make the numbers work, is you needed more revenue because it simply wasn't making enough money to justify what my dad needed.
We're going to come back to that story in a minute, because we're coming to a commercial break, and I think that's the fascinating part and a lot of the reason why you came to Seattle. So if you're listening to the program, don't go away. You want to find out, why did Mark come to Seattle after all that family history in Chicago? He's going to tell us right after the commercial break.
More About Money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So I'm talking to Mark Stern. We just had gotten to the point where he was talking about his family history of movie theaters in Chicago. And he ends up in Seattle. Why? Let's talk about the situation in Chicago and how you got to Seattle.
The story of, probably every entrepreneur who's starting out, rejection. So I guess I would have the big R on my chest or whatever for rejection. So I wanted to buy my dad's theater. I worked for him for 20 years, and I always thought that in order to make a movie theater successful, I mean really successful, you had to serve liquor. Liquor was the magic ingredient that was missing from the experience of going to the movies. So I wanted to get the blessing of the village mayor before I applied for the liquor license in the town of Wilmette. And I called the mayor. This is actually now exactly 22 years ago that this happened, this phone call. And I called the mayor up and I said, "Hi, I'm Mark Stern from the Wilmette Theater." And I said, "Do you know who I am?" Or he goes, "I know exactly who you are." And he said it that way. So it really took me back. I'm like, oh my gosh, this doesn't sound good. So I said, well, I want to bring liquor to the experience of going to the movies, and I want to do this concept where you can see a movie and have a cocktail or beer and wine. And I said to him, I want to apply for a liquor license. What do you think about that? And he said, what do I think about it? I think it's a terrible idea, and you're never going to serve liquor in this town, and I resent that you are even wanting to apply for this license. And I was like, this was happening so fast. It was so not what I was expecting. And I said to him, "You resent it?" And he says, "Yes, I resent it." He says, "You're going to bring in an undesirable audience, and we're not going to have it." And then he said, "Is there anything else I can do for you, sir?" And it's almost like a Dickens kind of moment. And I was like, well, no, I guess not. And he goes, "Good day, sir." Click. And that was it.
Sounds like Henry Hill from the Music Man.
The music, yeah. There's no music in River City. Is that it? I guess. I don't know. I remember that movie as a kid. Robert Preston, right?
Yes.
I believe, yeah. So anyways, long story short, because it was a doozy, I decided, being stubborn, I was going to apply for the liquor license anyways. So I called up the Chicago Sun-Times, and I said, "Hi, this is Mark Stern from the Wilmette Theater." Oh, because we advertised with that paper for generations, putting our ads, our classified ads, so they knew us very well. And I said, "I have a question. What do you think about, I'm going to apply for a liquor license to serve liquor and beer and wine at a movie theater, the Wilmette Theater. What do you think? Would that be a story you would be interested in covering?" And they were like, "Yeah. Oh my God, you want to serve liquor in a movie theater?" I said, "Yeah, that's what I want to do." So they said, "Okay, well, we're going to have a reporter come out tomorrow, but let me call you right back to verify." And I was like, now I went from the pariah, by one phone call to very interested to the next. So they called back literally within 5 minutes, and they said, "Would it be all right? We want to do a story about this, but would it be all right if we bring a photographer too?" And I said, "Well, yeah, you can bring a photographer, of course." So the next day, I have it all planned out. So I am all ready. I have a big goblet, a clear glass goblet, like at the medieval festivals, but it's glass, clear. And I filled it up with Coca-Cola. And I had a big bag of popcorn in the other arm. And the photographer and the reporter come to the Wilmette Theater, and they take a shot of me with the big goblet of Coke to my mouth, sipping it, and the big thing of popcorn in the other arm. And that's the shot. And then they interviewed me like you did about my vision and what I wanted to do and why I wanted to serve liquor in a theater. It was a big, unbeknownst to me, it was going to be a big story. How big, I did not realize at that moment. So the next day, I would get the papers delivered to my doorstep because we would always not only read the paper, but check that the ads were correct. And at literally 7 in the morning, my father is calling me on the phone. And he's like, did you see the paper? Did you see the paper? And I'm like, no, I didn't see the newspaper. He goes, well, you're in the paper. So I go to the front door, I open the door, and I pick up the newspaper, and I bring it into the kitchen table, and I start flipping through it. And I'm not in the paper. I look in the movie section. There's nothing about me in the movie section about this story. And my dad was like losing his marbles about how excited he was at such a big story. And then I looked in the business section. I'm not in the business section. So I literally take the paper and fold it back up. And I call my dad up and I said, what are you talking about? I'm in the newspaper. I said, I looked in the movie section. I looked in the business section. There's nothing in the paper about me applying for a liquor license. He said to me, because my father, are you on drugs? And I said, am I on drugs? What do you mean, am I on drugs? He goes, you're on the front page. So anyways, I was on half the front page was me in color, whole big story. So it was wild, And then we got our day. We went to the meeting, the hearing. It's an open hearing where anyone can speak their mind. And the place was packed. And everybody can speak. Everybody thought, not one person thought serving liquor in a movie theater was a good idea. They thought it was terrible. And they said that, all these terrible things would happen. And every village trustee voted it down. And we had some other movie theaters that I owned and operated. We were lucky to sell those theaters. My wife had a big corporate job with General Rhee, and Warren Buffett bought it, took it over. She was one of his many vice presidents of the company, and she got a golden parachute. I got in a car. We drove to Seattle, 2,000 miles. We found a location, and proud to tell you that we opened up the first liquor on the West Coast, not in the United States, but on the West Coast to open a movie theater that serves liquor. And we have the world's largest companies who come do their events with us. And I'll never forget being told we'll bring in an undesirable audience. And, with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Amazon, Microsoft, Boeing have done events. I mean, you name almost any company, and I will gladly tell you that none of my customers are undesirable to me.
So tell us about the experience, because, I've been there. I understand the experience. And until you're there, I don't think you can really imagine it. But tell us about the experience of coming to the big picture, first run movies.
Mm-hmm.
And
luckily, that's another story with Regal,
yes,
telling everybody not to serve Mark and Katie any pictures because so Regal put a hex on us, and we were almost out of business right after we opened, but that's another story.
So tell us about the experience, because it is a very positive experience.
Well, the fun thing about what it is number one, if you're not familiar with Big Picture, it's hard to find us. And many people who were advising me felt that was a bad thing because you wanted to be highly visible. And I felt, no, that's what will give us more cachet, kind of like a speakeasy type experience. So it's not visible from the street, and it's in a restaurant. And many times people will walk down this staircase that's nothing special, plain, large, but nothing special staircase. And it's like, to me, where the door opens up when Dorothy lands in Oz was the goal. In a small version of that, of course. But the inspiration was when you walked into Big Picture, your brain, no matter what, was not going to recognize a movie theater. And when you walk in, there's all these furnishings. It's French, Asian influence of design, Casablanca maybe type feel, if you will. There's no concession counter. It's a beautiful bar, and the theater is clearly not even visible. So we, basically created a theater that is not even recognizable when you look at it. That's a theater. So many people will ask us, we're looking for a movie theater called Big Picture. Do you know where it's located? Is it somewhere in this building? And we're like, no, you're in Big Picture.
It is a time of socializing as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A lot of times people will talk too long before the movie with their friends in different seated areas, and we will try to just politely remind them that the movie's about to start. So usually when you go to a movie theater, you pretty much, after you get your concessions, you're going right in. We have many people who, need to be reminded it's showtime.
So tell us where it's located and how people would find it.
Well,
we're coming to commercial break. We want to get that in.
Sure. We're at 2505 First Avenue in the heart of Belltown, First Avenue and Wall Street. We're in the same front door entrance as El Gaucho, the iconic steakhouse.
So anyway, if you can find El Gaucho, you can find the Big Picture. Do go. I mean, it's an experience, something that you have to try. First-run movies and a very great time to socialize. Go early so that you can meet all the others who are actually at the picture show. Anyway, we're coming back right after the commercial break. Don't go away. I want to talk about what I saw on CNBC. I think you want to hear this.
More About Money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So for the last 9 years, I've been talking about Dow 100,000. When Dow was at 6,000, it seemed like a really crazy idea. Today, as we're approaching 30,000, maybe not so bad. Since the beginning of 2012, I've talked about one of the reasons why, or the biggest reason why we're going to get to 100,000 is the super cycle. Been talking about that since 2012. And I've talked for the last 5 years, about how this could be ending in a period of high inflation. Even with all that, I know that I could be wrong. And so when I'm watching CNBC and I'm watching this big 40-inch screen I've got hanging on my wall, I started with a little tiny screen. I mean, when I first licensed in 1986, the big thing to listen to or to see on TV was Wall Street Week. It aired at 7 or 8 o'clock on Friday nights. Louis Rukeyser would have guests on who would talk about what the market did during the week. I mean, those seem like nostalgic days when you talked about what happened in the market during the week. Today we talk about what happened in the market in the last hour. I mean, times have really sped up. But you would have some people that would talk about some stocks or they would talk about the market. And every once in a while, one of my clients would call and want to talk about something they heard about on Wall Street Week. And so you almost had to watch Wall Street Week so that you were able to talk intelligently with your clients. But in 1989, something new happened, and a TV show called CNBC started. And it took a while for it to get going, but it really got going during dot-com days. I remember that. I can remember the ads they used to run. They used to drive the people that I worked with crazy. They used to have the ad of the day trader who bought an island. Of course, it wasn't true. The ad that got most people, that I thought was the most funny ad of all, because maybe there's some truth to it, was an ad put on by Schwab as to why you should do a discount broker instead of a full-service broker. The ad, of course, was in 2002, had the sales manager of a full-service brokerage firm talking to his salesmen who were stockbrokers, who were called by that time financial advisors. He's talking to the financial advisors and said, let's put some lipstick on this pig and put this stock out to everybody. People used to get so upset about that. I thought it was great. But CNBC, during that period of time, reached a peak audience, and it's kind of leveled off. And at the time, in the end of the 90s and the beginning of 2000s, I had this little tiny TV screen that was like a 15-inch TV screen. Had it sitting on a shelf in my office, and it would play most days, and I would listen to it out of my ear while I was making calls and doing something else, not paying a lot of attention, but every once in a while there'd be something of interest. And then when I moved into my new office, it's way up in the building, and it's now a 43-inch screen. It's no longer 15 inches. And I look at it about as often as I did the 15-inch screen. But every once in a while, there's something that just brings me to a dead stop in what I'm doing to listen to what's on that screen. And that happened this week. Guy's talking about why we're going to have another crash. And it was all about debt. He said government debts reached record levels, and now we're going to have, with what's done with the tax bill and infrastructure and so on, they're going to add another $4 trillion to government debt. Household debt, and he had these charts. Household debts reach record levels. And then he put up the default. And, I forgot, corporate financial debt was at record levels as well. All this debt building up, and he said it's all defaulting as well. Serious auto loan defaults have reached an all-time high. And he put the chart up, and it's a line that's almost straight from the low left-hand side to the right-hand side. It's as if the Great Recession never had an impact on auto loan defaults. And then he put up student loan delinquencies have reached record levels. And he put that, and there's a little dip in the chart, but it also starts at the lower left-hand level and goes to the right-hand level. And I'm really sitting up taking a look at this because, debt is what caused the Great Recession when the financial markets came apart. So I'm looking at this. And so I start looking at the numbers. After it's all done, I interrupt everything I'm doing that day to see how accurate what he says. So when I looked, and I wanted to look first of all at the serious delinquencies, the auto loans were a total of had reached almost $50 billion of serious delinquencies. Student loan debt had reached almost $160 billion of total delinquencies. And both numbers, his charts were correct. They were right on. And then I looked at total delinquencies, everything. And total delinquencies had reached, in the Great Depression times, 1.2 trillion, and had been coming down since 2009 to 400 billion. So you have two curves that are going up. And if you draw a chart, these are way at the bottom of the chart, and the total delinquencies reach a peak and are coming down. Doesn't really stack up. Then I looked at, backing up. Car loans are also going to be delinquent because of the hurricanes that happened. There were a lot of people whose cars were destroyed. If you look at car sales took a big jump up last year with the hurricanes because cars were destroyed during the hurricanes. So then I looked at the corporate debt. And, sure enough, corporate debt is increasing, but it's almost a typical pattern. When interest rates are really low, what do corporations do? They go out and raise cash. And when you can raise cash at 2% or 3%, and you can invest it and make 8 or 10 or 15% on the money you borrowed, that's a profitable thing to do. Then I looked at it in terms of corporate debt as a percent of assets. As a percent of assets, corporate debt is at about the average that it's been the last 30 years. We've had some ups and downs, but it's significantly less than it was in the Great Recession times or leading up to Great Recession times. So then I looked at household debt. And as a percent of assets, household debt's 2/3 lower than the average. Household debt is no worse than it was in 2000 or 1990. It's 2/3 of what it was in 1990. So all those charts, all of what he said, made it look terrible. But he took charts to make it look terrible. Bob Veres is a guy that writes a column for Financial Planning magazine. And he also does a newsletter called the Insider Information Newsletter. And some time ago, he wrote an article, and after I looked at all this information, it reminded me of Bob Veres in his column. And during that column, he said, do you really want to become a really noted financial advisor? He says, just pick any old day and call up a reporter or a TV channel and tell him that the market's about to crash. He said, you'll get a story. And he gave examples. Andrew Roberts of the Royal Bank of Scotland in June of 2010 said the market was going to crash. 2010 said, we were on a cliff edge just around the corner of the banking system, and what was going to happen was going to be unthinkable. Here we are 8 years later, didn't happen. Mark Faber said the market was going to be worse than 1987 crash. Michael Lombardi said we're going to have the great crash of 2013. None of those happened. We have a very positive outlook. Stay with me. We're going to talk about real views of the market coming up in the next weeks. Don't go away. Have a great weekend, and I will be back to give you the answer about money.
You've been listening to About Money with Mike Adams, a registered investment advisor. If you'd like more information about what you heard today, or about Mike's investment philosophy and strategy, or if you'd like Mike to evaluate your own portfolio, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com. The information shared in the preceding program was for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. Join us again next Saturday at noon for more About Money with Mike Adams here on AM 1590. The Answer. The preceding program was sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts. The following program is sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts.